The legend speaks of the greatest king on the continent of Ares, a ruler surrounded by abnormal companions who continued to fight until the end. He was known as the Mad King, Mars. Before his death, he left behind strange final words, remembered as a refusal towards something unbearably disgusting. That is how the story is told. In the present, an attendant approaches and brings food close. Mars shows no appetite and dismisses her. This Mars is the prince of a small kingdom on the edge of the continent of Ares. As a prince, it would be natural to assume he lives on luxurious and carefully prepared meals. Instead, he is eating monster meat just to survive. He escaped the castle and now hunts and consumes monsters in the forest. It is not because the kingdom lacks food. As a prince, he had more than enough. The problem is that most of what awaited him in the castle was tainted with poison. The kingdom is steeped in corruption, ruled and practiced by the tyrannical prime minister, Gamras. For reasons of his own, Gamera sees Mars as an obstacle and is determined to have him assassinated. Even after cooking it, the monster meat tastes awful. It is barely tolerable, but eating it is necessary if Mars wants to stay alive. He endures it, aware that this cannot be a temporary hardship, yet unable to see when it will end. Just as he is about to take another bite, a mysterious girl suddenly appears behind him. Her presence is abrupt, close enough to startle him. She makes her intent clear immediately, showing interest in taking him on as her pupil. Mars reacts by stepping back and drawing his sword. He had not sensed her approach at all, which immediately sets her apart. The girl indicates that he still has much to learn, while also recognizing a latent potential within him. She considers him worthy of inheriting her blade. Mars demands a reason for this judgment. The girl responds with a brief smile, pointing to the simple fact of what he is eating. The implication leaves him visibly confused, caught off guard by her reasoning and unsure how to respond. The girl explains that when a human eats monster meat, they can slowly absorb the strength of the monsters. The process is extremely gradual, but it is real. She adds that monster meat tastes terrible and is poisonous, which is why normal people would never choose to eat it. Mars listens in silence. He questions who this girl is and why she is suddenly explaining something like this to him. He responds by explaining that he vomited the first few times he ate it, but that the poison in monster meat is still less deadly than the meals that killed his poison tester. The girl reacts to this, taken aback by the mention of a poison tester being killed. Although it is an internal matter of the kingdom, Mars explains the situation to her. He reveals that he is a prince, that his mother is dead, and that his father, despite being king, refuses to protect him. Because of his struggle for the throne, he has become a constant target for assassination, and every meal served to him in the castle is now laced with poison. The girl asks if he is eating monster meat because he is fleeing from the poisoned food in the castle. She also reminds him that monster meat itself is poisonous. Mars answers that it is manageable once he gets used to it. It will not kill him, even if the taste remains unbearable. She shows no sympathy in response and simply ignores his complaint. The reaction comes across as rude, but it also steadies him more than he expects. The girl remarks that his ability to adapt like that makes him remarkable. At the same time, she points out that if he is still afraid of poison, then he still has a long way to go. She then throws an object toward Mars. He catches it, unsettled by its ominous appearance, and thanks her. He points out that she is giving something like this to someone she has only just met and questions why she would go so far. Mars then asks who she really is. The girl introduces herself as Cassandra. Mars repeats the name, and his eyes widen as realization sets in. He confirms the name again, recognizing it as the red demon sword Cassandra. Cassandra acknowledges that people do call her that, though she makes it clear that she does not particularly like the title. The red demon, also known as the beast, is a warrior consumed by battle. She is a famed sword saint who has defeated dragons and even evil gods. Knowing this, Mars smiles faintly, realizing that receiving a ring from someone like her must mean it is a powerful magic item. He also understands that if Cassandra truly accepts him as her pupil, the threat of assassination would no longer loom over him. With that expectation, he puts the ring on. Only then does Cassandra reveal that the ring is cursed, a tool that afflicts its wearer with poison. The shift in Mars's expression is immediate. She explains that this is his first test under her guidance, a trial to prove that he can overcome the poison inflicted by the ring. A sudden sensation tightens his throat. His body reacts before he can fully understand what is happening, and the feeling convinces him that death may be close. Cassandra steps toward him, making it clear that relying on items to deal with something as simple as poison is unacceptable. She expects him to conquer the poison on his own. According to her, poison resistance is learned by defeating poison itself. She makes it clear that the ring cannot be removed unless he overcomes its curse, and if he fails, he will die. Ordinary people would perish quickly, but because Mars has been eating monster meat, he should be able to endure it. Mars comes to a blunt realization. Cassandra is dangerous. As a first lesson, she has forced him to wear a poisonous item, even though he has spent his life trying to avoid poison altogether. The irony is impossible to miss. Inside the castle, an elderly man examines Mars and admits that the poison cannot be healed. Even cure magic proves ineffective. Mars lingers between life and death for 3 days and 3 nights. One by one, the doctors give up on trying to save him. Rumors spread throughout the castle that the prince has finally succumbed to poison. In the end, Mars survives. The people around him celebrate his recovery. No one questions the fact that he was poisoned yet again. His father reminds him that protecting himself is his own responsibility, a remark that feels cold given the circumstances, even if this time the poisoning was truly of Mars's own making. After recovering, Mars tastes the food served to him. He expects the familiar danger, certain it is poisoned. Nothing happens. His body does not react. He feels no sickness at all. At that moment, Mars understands. The poison no longer affects him. He has conquered it. Mars returns to eating normal food. He understands that gaining poison resistance was not easy, but the result makes survival far more manageable. One night, he goes into the forest and informs Cassandra that he has conquered the poison. She accepts the result calmly, having expected it. With this, deadly poison is no longer something he needs to fear. Mars expresses his gratitude to her. Cassandra then places something on the ground and tells him she is giving it to him. They are bracelets enchanted with gravity magic, designed to double his weight when worn. At that moment, Mars begins to suspect that his training is far from over and that Cassandra's methods are consistently pushing him toward danger. She asks whether he is still eating monster meat. Mars answers that he has not done so for a week. Now that poison is no longer a concern, he believes there is no longer a reason to continue eating it, and he questions whether stopping was a mistake. Without responding directly, Cassandra walks away and tells him to wait. When she returns, she brings the corpse of a monster. She throws a piece of its meat toward Mars and instructs him to eat it. The creature is a great basilisk, a rare monster. She explains that if he truly conquered the poison of the ring, then he should be able to handle this as well. The meat is raw. Mars asks if it could be cooked first. Cassandra refuses, stating that cooking it would reduce its effectiveness. Left with no alternative, Mars eats the meat. His body reacts immediately, and he nearly vomits, sensing that this could easily kill him. Cassandra presses him to swallow it completely. After forcing it down, Mars collapses to his knees. He asks whether the meat itself is poisonous. Cassandra confirms it without hesitation. She explains that the stronger the monster, the more poisonous its meat is to humans. As an example, she notes that dragon meat would be lethally toxic. The great basilisk's flesh, she judges, is the most Mars can handle at his current level. She adds that even a single lick of it would be enough to kill hundreds of ordinary adults. Mars comes to understand that Cassandra is dangerously unhinged, yet he forces that realization aside. He assumes the training for the day is over. Instead, Cassandra orders him to finish all of the remaining meat. Mars objects, judging the amount excessive by any standard. Cassandra challenges that hesitation, pressing him on whether he believes he is already strong enough and no longer needs monster meat. She urges him to test that belief by attacking her with the sword in his hands. Mars is caught off guard when she does not even draw her own weapon. It feels as though she is looking down on him. He charges at her and attacks with everything he has. Cassandra responds with a single kick. The impact sends Mars flying. She approaches him calmly and makes it clear that he is still weak and still needs to eat more monster meat. She forces the meat against his mouth, leaving him no choice. It takes time, but Mars eats all of it. Tears stream down his face as he does. From that point on, the training does not stop. Days pass with Mars repeatedly eating monster meat and learning swordsmanship under Cassandra's guidance. Although they only meet once a week, she watches him closely and immediately notices whether his growth is fast enough. If Mars tries to cheat by avoiding monster meat, she forces it down his throat. If he does not take the training seriously, She beats him without restraint. Before long, his training shifts into constant combat alongside consuming monsters. Even so, Cassandra does not allow him to fight recklessly. She carefully selects monsters that he can barely defeat on his own. No matter how strong the enemies are, Cassandra herself remains far beyond them all. As the training progresses, Cassandra notices steady improvement. She pushes Mars to challenge her directly and attempt to kill her. Cassandra controls her strength precisely, holding back just enough to avoid killing him. Her movements are so fast that Mars's body cannot keep up, leaving him repeatedly overwhelmed. 3 years pass in this relentless routine. By then, Cassandra acknowledges that Mars is beginning to grasp it. Through countless near-death encounters, Mars develops the ability to sense presences and evade attacks. It is not refinement that drives this growth, but pure survival instinct, shaped by the constant need to avoid Cassandra's blows. In the end, Mars's 3 years under Cassandra amount to nothing but relentless torture. Compared to facing her or battling powerful monsters, dealing with assassins in the castle now feels trivial. Then one day, Cassandra allows him to face a massive wyvern as it dives down from the sky. In a single exchange, Mars cuts the creature apart. The fight ends almost as soon as it begins. Cassandra acknowledges the result with approval. Even if a wyvern is weaker than a true dragon, it is still a formidable monster, and Mars has brought it down cleanly. She recognizes that he has grown strong. She also notices that he has become accustomed to eating monster meat. Mars confirms that he eats it every day. Cassandra notes that growing stronger is what matters. Mars agrees. She smiles. She then tells him that there is nothing left for her to teach. She reminds him to continue training on his own and warns him that if he slacks off, she will kill him for real the next time they meet. That is all she says before leaving. Only afterward does Mars realize that he never once asked where she lived. It becomes clear that Cassandra is a wanderer, traveling the world in search of strong opponents. Staying in one kingdom for 3 years was likely unusual for her. Even so, Mars has no doubt that she would return without hesitation if he were to abandon his training. He is grateful for what he endured. He is stronger now, but he understands that strength alone is never enough. The fragile path he clung to in order to escape assassins led him straight through hell. Mars does not yet know how meeting Cassandra will ultimately shape his life. But to survive the assassins sent by Gemelas, to stand against powerful monsters, and above all, to avoid being killed by his own master, he has only one option. He must keep eating monster meat. If you made it this far, it probably means you're enjoying the story. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. We'll keep bringing you great manga stories. Some time had passed since Cassandra disappeared. Mars continued to be targeted by assassins. Another struck that day, and Mars killed it cleanly. It became the 10th assassin that month. The frequency unsettled him. If this continued, even the assassin industry would face a shortage of workers. Gamera, as always, remained relentless in her pursuit of his life. Gamera's plan was already in motion. She forced Mars's father into marrying her daughter, intending to produce a son. Through that child, she would claim the right to the throne. For that to happen, Mars had to be removed. His existence alone stood in the way. Cassandra, the Red Demon, had somehow become Mars's mentor. Her guidance came wrapped in violence. Her training pushed him to the edge of death again and again. She ordered him to keep eating monster meat, to keep strengthening his body. She warned him plainly that if he grew lazy before their next meeting, she would kill him herself. The lesson was simple and absolute. Mars had no choice but to grow stronger if he wanted to survive. Nearby, Mars noticed a group of men sparring. One stood alone against 4 others. He stopped to watch. It struck him as unusual. Falloon had known more than 200 years of peace. Without war, practical combat training had nearly vanished. Swordsmanship was treated as obsolete, unnecessary in an age of stability. Many even dismissed it as something barbarians relied on. Sword duels were outright prohibited. Those who still trained seriously were labeled dangerous or insane. Such people were not admired. They were watched, judged, and often imprisoned. That was the accepted order of things. Mars stepped forward and approached the group. He asked calmly if he could join them. One man immediately questioned who he was. Another assumed he must be a noble's child. They told him to leave if he did not want to get killed. One of them sneered, convinced Mars was looking down on them, trying to toy with them for his own amusement. Mars quickly realized that the men disliked nobles. Their suspicion was open and unhidden. One of them, seeming to grasp Mars's intent, allowed him to train with them anyway. He gave a blunt warning. If Mars died, there would be no complaints. The man charged first. His name was Abma. The moment he closed the distance, Mars struck. Abma was sent flying, his body thrown aside as if weightless. Mars looked at him calmly and remarked that he was still alive. Under normal circumstances, an assassin would have been split in half by that blow. The rest attacked at once. There was no hesitation and no order. A few moments later, the fight was over. The men were lined up on their knees. Mars stood before them and spoke evenly. From that day on, they would serve as his training partners once every 7 days. He stated the reason plainly. As they had just witnessed, he was stronger than all 5 of them combined. One man shouted his refusal. He accused Mars of killing time, of using them as entertainment. He said they already struggled to secure meals each day. His anger sharpened as he spoke. That kind of hardship, he said, was something a noble would never understand. Someone who ate well every day could not know hunger. He demanded to know what Mars would eat that night. Mars answered without hesitation. Red bone meat. The man froze, confused. Agma spoke instead. He pointed out that red bone meat came from monster. A red bone was not something a single person like Mars could defeat alone. Another man accused Mars of lying. Everyone knew monster meat was poisonous. That was common knowledge. Mars replied calmly that calling him a liar was ignorance. He told them to look behind them. A massive blood bear stood there. Panic spread instantly. Screams broke out as the weight of the creature's presence crushed the air around them. Mars briefly judged whether the blood bear would be suitable for tomorrow's meal. The decision was made in an instant. He moved forward and cut off its head. The massive body collapsed without another sound. Agma stared in disbelief. Mars showed them what he meant by proof. He cut into the meat and ate it in front of them. Then he urged Agma to try it as well. He warned him to take only a small bite. If he swallowed too much at once, he would likely die. Agma did as instructed and took a small bite. His body rejected it immediately. He nearly vomited, unaccustomed to monster meat. Agma had been born the 3rd son of noble. His family valued manners and appearances over skill with the sword. He had always hated that life. To him, a sword existed for one purpose alone, to grow stronger. Society labeled him a disgrace among nobles, while others mocked him as a fool wasting his effort. To escape that suffocating judgment, Agma hid his identity and gathered like-minded companions. Together, they formed a group called 100. It was an organization devoted solely to power. Within 100, power determined everything. Rank was decided by strength alone. The title of one belonged to the strongest member. The group had grown to more than 20 members. They took pride in calling themselves the strongest force in the country. They even claimed superiority over the knights, whom they dismissed as ceremonial and hollow. Now, a seeker of far greater power stood before them. Mars urged Agma to continue eating monster meat. After Agma finished, Mars told him it was still too early for blood bear meat. He explained that Agma first needed to adapt by eating weaker local monsters, such as killer rabbits. Agma reflected in silence. In the end, their confidence had been nothing more than self-deception. They lacked true power, true resolve, and true understanding. Yet they had called themselves seekers of power. He bowed deeply before Mars. He said that Mars deserved the title of number 0, the one beyond the strongest. He declared that 100 would accept his guidance and asked Mars to join them and teach them. Mars repeated the unfamiliar title aloud. Number 0. Agma formally bestowed the name upon him. He added that Mars should also take a new name. Mars was too conspicuous. 0 suited him perfectly. Mars concealed his appearance behind armor he had found in an ancient room. Under his protection, he began training with everyone in 100, allowing him to fight with full strength. His ability to face groups improved dramatically. Each sparring session sharpened his skill, his reflexes, and his strategy. Yet, no matter how many times Mars defeated the members of 100, they always rose again. They pressed him to fight until they collapsed from exhaustion. Not even the assassins sent to kill him had shown such relentless enthusiasm. The determination was unusual, but Mars found it satisfying. In that way, a year passed. The training continued without pause. It was productive, yet Mars sensed it was taking an unexpected turn. Every member of the group now ate monster meat. The hierarchy had shifted. Those who could consume stronger monsters were celebrated, while those limited to weaker monsters were labeled weaklings. Mars disagreed quietly. A person's worth was not measured by the meat they could eat. Still, He could not deny the respect he received. Even as a prince, he had never been treated with such acknowledgement. The recognition was unfamiliar, and it stirred mixed feelings within him. Meanwhile, far from Hundred's training grounds, in the headquarters of the Black Knights of Falloon, Commander Chrome spoke sharply. He questioned whether it was possible that a group spent their days eating monster meat and training relentlessly. One of his knights confirmed the rumor. It was true. The group called itself 100, and, astonishingly, some of their members had formerly been participants in the Black Knights. Chrome's expression hardened, shock giving way to tension. Other civilians saw it as a relief that the group was hunting monsters, easing the burden on those already stretched thin by the most dangerous threats. Commander Chrome, however, viewed the situation with caution. The act of eating monster meat and drinking its blood suggested the possibility of ties to a sinister cult, and he could not ignore the chance that some participants were his own subordinates. Determined to uncover the truth, he resolved to personally investigate the 100 and their activities. If they sought to spread chaos within the country, the Black Knights would confront them directly. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, another member of the 100 prepared to guide a newcomer through the process of hunting monsters, advising patience and restraint. The man with a mohawk instructed the novices to consume monster meat gradually, emphasizing careful progression. Observing from distance, Chrome noted how different the scene was from what he had imagined. The organization's openness was puzzling, and he could not discern who belonged or why anyone could join. The mohawk-haired member turned his attention to Chrome, acknowledging his swordsmanship and suggesting he could immediately enter the 100's ranking battle. He explained the group's golden rule: eating monster meat. Strength alone was insufficient. Refusal to consume, it marked a lack of resolve. He handed Chrome a piece of the meat, pressing him to try it. Though warned it might taste unpleasant, Chrome understood that enduring it would enhance his physical strength. Reluctantly, he accepted and took a bite, thinking that, having come this far, it was a necessary step forward. Chrome struggled as he bit into the monster meat, nearly gagging. The man with the mohawk laughed, recalling that he had started the same way. Chrome, wary, considered that this person might know his true identity and could be trying to poison him. The thought only strengthened his suspicion that the 100 were tied to something dark. He resolved that, once he had proof, he would take them down. A year passed. Chrome's body had grown more muscular, and he acknowledged the transformative power of monster meat. His strength had increased, and his body felt invigorated. Every night, the 100 hunted monsters consumed their meat and engaged in real duels among comrades until one fell. Chrome, who had once questioned his own sanity, now found the pursuit of pure strength intensely compelling. He thought often of a man named Zeros, the top of the 100. Zeros had mastered legendary skills, Sonic Blade and Magic Barrier, once said to belong only to the hero who founded the country. Beyond that, he generously shared his knowledge with those seeking power. Chrome admired how Zeros offered guidance without holding back, wondering how one could possess such a divine spirit. In this environment, Chrome realized that attempting to subjugate the 100 would be sacrilege. Here, among the hunters and warriors, he found his true purpose. Meanwhile, in the castle, Mars walked the hallways. Rumors of the 100 had begun to circulate. Some called them barbarians. Others praised them as allies of the common people who helped subjugate monsters. Opinions were divided. Unlike life as a prince, constantly under threat, Mars found himself quietly admiring the freedom and strength associated with the 100. In the throne room, Mars was asked if he knew about this group. Reports described a violent, chaotic organization, killing each other and eating monster meat. Mars acknowledged that the group seemed formidable and asked who had brought him this information. Gamera stepped forward, revealing that he was the one orchestrating Mars's path to the throne and implying a direct threat to his life. Gamera told Mars that his track record as a prince had been poor and offered a suggestion. He proposed that Mars subjugate the 100, explaining that victory would secure recognition of Mars as the rightful successor to the throne, both at home and abroad. Fortunately, Mars possessed exceptional sword skills, and Gamera insisted there was no one better suited to deal with the so-called bandits. Mars considered the proposal carefully. He recognized that the 100 was gaining the support of the people, and attacking them could erode his own backing. He suspected that Gamera was framing this as a form of revenge, using even Mars's father to enforce his plan. When asked if he could carry out the task, Mars acknowledged the request, humbly accepting it, though his mind raced with the question of how he should proceed. As he walked through the hallway, Mars reflected on Gamera's intentions. He knew the scheme was designed to place him in a compromising position, yet he refused to be manipulated. The challenge was how to resolve the situation without losing control. Nearby, a girl sat in a chair, drawing Mars's attention. She spoke, noting that it had been a long time since they last met. Mars, cautious, wondered who she was and why she had entered the room without permission. His instincts braced for danger, suspecting she might be a new assassin, though he noted she carried a distinguished aura that suggested otherwise. The girl addressed Mars directly, asking if he was willing to lend her his power given his position. Then, in a quiet but clear voice, she called him Zeros. Mars froze. How could she know his secret identity? Mars remained confused, uncertain how she knew him. Frau noted that she had expected him to forget and casually reminded him that she was his fiancée. Recognition flickered across Mars's face as he realized he did, in fact, have a fiancée. He apologized for not remembering sooner and questioned what she meant by calling him Zeros. Though Mars was the leader of 100 as Zeros, he had long hidden his identity as a prince. It had been years since he last saw Frau, making it seem impossible for her to know his current situation. Frau revealed that she had been watching over him all this time through a crest. The mark allowed her to share his vision and appear at his side at will. Mars stared at the mark on his wrist, stunned. Recalling their childhood, he remembered a strange spell Frau had cast on him as a child, one that had looked like a birthmark. At the time, he had found it interesting and ignored it. Now he understood that she had been monitoring him for years through that mark, and the realization of her capabilities made her dangerous. Frau had first met Mars when she was 8, introduced by her father as his fiancé. Despite his status as a prince, he had seemed ordinary aside from his fine clothing, and she had not taken much interest. At that age, she had just learned a new packmark spell and had used him as a test subject. The spell succeeded, leaving her satisfied. By the time Mars was 11, he had nearly died from poison. Frau, curious about the poison, used the contract for the first time in years. Around that period, Mars began to behave unusually, consuming monster meat. The development intrigued her, as she began to use the pact mark more frequently. Through her observations, she saw the prince's magical power steadily increasing. Fascinated, she decided to follow his example and consume monster meat herself. From that point on, she never grew bored of monitoring Prince Mars. Mars recognized the weight of the problem. His private life had been under Frau's constant surveillance, yet he pushed the thought aside. He asked her what she had meant by lending her power, but Frau deferred the explanation, insisting they would discuss it later. Meanwhile, at Hundred's base, the presence of Chrome and Warren drew attention. It was still difficult to believe that the two leaders of the 4 Knight Orders of the Red and Black Kingdoms had joined Hundred. In Falloon, 4 Knight Orders existed. The White Knights protected the king and the highest nobles. The Blue Knights guarded the royal capital, and the Red and Black Knights handled expeditions and monster subjugation during wartime. Zeros sensed the tension in the room. Adma approached and relayed urgent news. The country was attempting to annihilate Hundred. Chrome, commander of the Black Knights, and Warren, commander of the Red Knights, had been assigned to this task. Zeros processed the information quickly and decided that for now, they would leave the country to handle matter. Warren addressed the group, confirming that both he and Chrome, along with the Red and Black Knight Orders, had committed to supporting Hundred completely, deferring entirely to Zeros' decisions. Zeros paused, questioning the phrase until the end. Chrome explained that justice no longer existed in the country. If the Red and Black Knights joined Hundred, their combined strength would be sufficient, provided Zeros led them, giving them a real chance to succeed in the rebellion. The Zeros understood that they had no intention of retreating. The revelation of their willingness to betray their own country and spark civil war weighed heavily on him. Rebellion was not something he wanted to be involved in. He would rather escape to another country and live freely than participate in such turmoil. Still, Zeros knew the truth would change everything. He revealed his true face, and astonishment rippled through the room. They recognized him as Prince Mars, the hidden leader of Hundred. Mars allowed a small smile. Now, everyone understood that, as the Prince of Falloon, he could not simply rebel against his own country. Chrome finally understood what Zeros had meant. He addressed Prince Mars, confirming that he had received Mars's transmitted thoughts. Chrome explained that Mars did not desire a rebellion, but a legitimate war. It would not be a rebellion. With conviction, Crone declared that it would be a just battle for Prince Mars to claim his position as successor, with justice on their side. Mars reflected quietly that, whether he held the title of prince or not, initiating a rebellion against his country was still wrong. One member pointed out that Prince Mars had been preparing for this for many years, gathering and strengthening 100 for the eventual conflict. Mars thought silently that he had never organized forces for rebellion. He had only brought more people together, and somehow, the 100 now numbered over 1,000. He knew he needed to calm them and make them understand reality. He reminded them that even with an army, the royal castle was impenetrable, and questioned whether they truly had any chance of winning against the kingdom. Footsteps approached, and Mars was informed that it was not just the white and blue knights. There was also the magic division. Frau revealed that they would be allies of Prince Mars. Mars was taken aback by her arrival. Chrome laughed, noting that Mars need not test them. Frau had already briefed them on everything. Some members of 100 might not yet know, but Frau, nicknamed Frau, Empress of Thunder, was the central force of the magic division and a key figure in the country's defense. Frau confirmed she would lead the magic division. The men erupted in approval, confident that victory was now assured. Mars felt a quiet confusion. He had known Frau would lend her strength, but he had not expected such open support. It seemed they were preparing to fight rather than flee. The story was moving toward a rebellion against his own country, and he struggled to grasp how it had escalated so quickly. He asked Frau why she was helping him so much. Even though their engagement had been decided by their parents, he questioned whether it was truly worth taking such a dangerous path just for that. Frau admitted that her actions until now had not been proper for a fiancé. From this point forward, she would act as one in earnest. Her rise to the title of Empress of Thunder had come from following Mars's example, consuming monster meat to increase her magical power. Though she had once been indifferent to him, she now felt she could not even consider breaking their engagement. A life constantly on the edge of death fascinated her. She told Mars that she wished to continue watching over him and expressed that she was glad to have him as her fiancé. One of the members shouted in excitement, declaring that victory was now assured. With the commander of the Black Knights, Chrome, the commander of the Red Knights, Warren, Frau, Empress of Thunder, Agma, and all of 100 at his side, along with their leader Zeros, Prince Mars, they were prepared to strike against the corrupt nobles. Mars looked on, realizing he could not intervene. The group was formidable, seemingly unbreakable, and ready to push forward with a rebellion against the country. Despite the high chance of success, Mars felt the direction of events pressing him toward a path he had not chosen. The story was moving toward a conflict he had never sought, and he silently questioned when he had ever desired the throne at all. Crone declared their readiness to risk everything for Mars, affirming the prince as the rightful heir to the Falloon kingdom. Around them, the others cried out in the name of justice, determined to see the rebellion through. Mars reflected on the orders he had received to destroy the 100. At that moment, he had only two paths, to flee or to rebel. There was no way back. He had never intended to ignite a rebellion, nor did he seek the throne. Survival alone had been his concern. Having lived in isolation for so long, Mars now faced the weight of the people's trust. Their support pressed down on him, and refusing it was no longer an option. Frau recognized Mars as a threat to the kingdom. Yet, despite this, she could not tear her gaze away. She pledged to fight alongside him and to ensure the rebellion succeeded. The day to confront the 100 finally arrived. A knight standing behind, Mars observed his tension and asked if he was nervous, noting that this was his first real battle. The knight advised him to leave the fighting to the commanders of the Black and Red Knight orders. Mars' role, they emphasized, was to defeat Zero, the leader of the 100. Failure, they warned, would carry severe consequences. The White Knights, composed of noble children and essentially friends of Gamera's, were unlikely allies. They were poised to betray Mars rather than protect him, pushing him toward a confrontation with Zero in the hope that he would fall. Chrome and Warren approached, asking if Mars was ready to advance. Chrome requested a moment alone with the prince before the battle began. The commander knight instructed them to wait. The prince was not to be addressed directly. There was no reason for him to personally engage with the 100 beyond his critical task. The commander of the White Knights froze in surprise as the Black and Red Knights arrived in full force. The 100, mere commoners pretending to be knights, could not be treated as equals. Their so-called order of chivalry had fallen into disgrace. Mars observed Chrome and Warren, their enthusiasm clear, and felt his resolve harden. Stepping forward, he addressed all his troops, declaring that the enemy was already within the capital. The White Knight reacted with shock, questioning what he meant. Mars revealed the target, the 100. Without hesitation, Mars executed a sword strike. The members of the 100 stared in amazement. The blow was precise, controlled, and perfectly executed, leaving no doubt of his skill. Turning to another White Knight, Mars stated that, regardless of the battle's outcome, the knight had intended to kill him. The knight froze, stunned that Mars had discerned the truth. Chrome swiftly decapitated him, confirming Mars' assessment. One remaining White Knight pleaded for his life, insisting he would never dare to assassinate Mars. He explained that they had only followed the deputy commander's orders. Chrome's gaze hardened. He called the knight pathetic, questioning how such men could protect the kingdom, and warned that as long as they lived, true peace was impossible. With that, Chrome ended him, and the rest of the White Knights were cut down. With the threat eliminated, Chrome declared the White Knights tarnished and urged Mars to move forward. Together, they would deliver true justice to the corrupt kingdom. Mars acknowledged Chrome's loyalty, finding it deeply reassuring, though the intensity in his gaze was difficult to meet. Warren warned Mars that they were likely being watched. Mars acknowledged it calmly, noting that from this point onward, it would be a race against time. He urged them to move quickly toward the royal capital. At the city gates, a White Knight announced the prince's arrival and moved to seal the gates. Before they could act, Sir Bled of the Blue Knights struck the White Knight down, commanding that the gates be opened. The Blue Knights pledged themselves to Mars, reaffirming their loyalty. Mars recognized Sir Bled and commended his work. Sir Bled explained that the Blue Knights were responsible for maintaining order in the capital, but now they were fully committed to supporting their prince. As they entered the city, the 100 clashed with the remaining White Knights. One White Knight caught sight of Ogma and mocked him, claiming it was time to witness true swordsmanship. Ogma challenged that notion, insisting the 100 would show what real skill looked like. As Ogma struck, his movements precise and lethal, he emphasized that combat was not about display. It was about survival. True strength, he stated, was measured by defeating the enemy decisively, proving that high ideals alone could not shield them. Brute force alone could not end violence, and anyone who thought otherwise would be proven wrong. A White Knight acknowledged the truth. The 100 were nothing more than thugs. Mars observed silently, noting how accurate that assessment was, though the reality carried a weight of sadness. Another White Knight warned that the 100 had the mage core on their side, and once the mages joined, the fighting would become far more dangerous. At the Mage Tower, Frau's father called urgently. He reported that Mars had begun a rebellion and emphasized the seriousness of the situation. Frau interrupted, requesting that her father step down and transfer the family title to her. Her father reacted with confusion, questioning her request. He explained that he was not old enough to retire and reminded her that a woman could not inherit the family leadership. Frau began preparing a spell. Her father demanded to know her intent, but she moved forward without hesitation. She unleashed a powerful lightning spell aimed at the other mages, declaring the start of a rebellion. She explained the sequence of her attack. First a shock, followed by lightning. If that was survived, an explosion would follow, and finally, if one endured that, dissolution would come. The mages pleaded with her to stop, but she remained resolute. Frau turned once more to her father, begging him to surrender the family title to her. She pleaded that he grant her this one wish. Outside, one of Mars' allies noticed the delay in the Mage Corps' arrival and asked if something was wrong, speculating that Frau might have intervened. At that moment, Gamorous appeared, calling out to Prince Mars. He remarked on the unexpected turn of events, Mars now leading a rebellion. Then, declaring the prince's path to the throne over in his name, Gamorous announced that Mars' life was forfeit. A group of figures stepped forward, blocking Mars' advance, warning him to prepare for the fight ahead. The party announced their intent to end Mars' life. His father stepped forward, and Mars met his gaze, recalling that he had never investigated his mother's death. He suspected his father only cared about his own safety, indifferent to who would survive. A mage unleashed a gravity spell on Mars. He remained calm. Gamorous explained that the spell should immobilize him, and that his sudden rebellion had been anticipated. A-rank adventurers had been hired, and reinforcements would soon close in, ending Mars' resistance. Mars, however, wore the gravity bracelet given by Cassandra. He simply walked past the spell. One adventurer, bewildered, questioned how the gravity had failed. Mars explained that it was functioning as expected. He was just accustomed to it. Suddenly, an explosion erupted from above. An adventurer identified it as the power of a poison lizard, warning Mars that paralysis would follow. Mars recognized the creature, recalling the taste of its meat and dismissing it as disgusting. The adventurer recoiled, incredulous that Mars had eaten pure poison. Another adventurer charged, convinced Mars was bluffing. Mars met the attack with a single precise strike. The adventurers watched in shock as their ally was cut in half. One member asked the healer if the fallen could be revived, but she explained that only a necromancer could restore him. Mars apologized quietly, noting that it had been some time since he fought without the bracelet, and he had briefly lost control. Daggers flew toward him from the remaining party members. The party member called to Mika to prepare an attack spell, Luida to provide support, and Chad to create a distraction. Unfazed, he struck an approaching adventurer with a sonic blade. The impact was instantaneous. The target was bisected. Another member demanded healing, but the healer replied that only a saint could restore him. Angered, the party launched a coordinated assault with blazing crimson flames. One declared that Mars' fire should be met with fire. Mars braced, admitting he could not block the attack, but a magic barrier intercepted the flames. The party froze. The mage collapsed to her knees, astonished, admitting it had been her strongest spell. A magic barrier of that strength, she realized, was only possible from a high-level monster. Mars smiled, quietly savoring the shock on their faces. He had mastered his current skill through repeated encounters with the demon ape, perfecting it after consuming its meat. As he advanced, he told the party to step aside. He had no intention of killing them. The party leader stepped in to block him. Mars suggested he run, promising to spare him. The leader, anger flaring, refused to be mocked. He questioned whether Mars truly believed they would retreat after their comrades had been killed. Declaring himself an A-rank adventurer, he launched a sword strike. Mars blocked it instantly. After several exchanges of sword strikes, Mars recognized that the party leader was a skilled swordsman, someone capable of keeping up with him. He then chose to end the exchange with a single, powerful kick. The blow sent the party leader crashing into the wall. He stared in disbelief, unable to accept that such force came from nothing more than a kick. He questioned whether Mars was truly a swordsman or a monk. Mars explained that his master had always fought that way, and he had simply followed the same approach. Turning his attention to Gamera's, Mars noted that he was the only one remaining. Gamera's composure faltered, anxiety and fear evident. Gamera's reflected on how it had come to this. He had poured his heart and soul into the kingdom, believing that every choice he made was for the people. 15 years earlier, the kingdom had been in chaos, with the former queen at its center. To save the country, Gamera's had persuaded the king to carry out a coup. From that moment on, he worked relentlessly alongside the nobles, slowly rebuilding the nation while keeping constant watch over them. Everything he did was for the kingdom and its people. He believed that only by accepting both the good and the bad could such a fragile system be maintained. Even so, Prince Mars had always stood in the way of that vision. Gamera's knew that sooner or later the nobles would try to use Mars as a political pawn. To prevent that future, he decided Mars had to be eliminated, despite his innocence. Poisons, traps, and assassins were all deployed. Yet Mars survived every attempt, without protection or allies. Nearby, Adma shouted that the nobles had all been crushed, declaring that Gamera's was the only one left. Mars was taken aback by the news. If the 100 had truly wiped out every noble, he wondered how the kingdom could possibly be governed. Gamera's, meanwhile, questioned whether Prince Mars was also Zero. He wondered if Mars had built his own faction in secret, and whether he had been preparing for this moment all along. Mars, watching the aftermath, realized that the 100 could not rule a kingdom. He considered that it might be better for his father to remain on the throne. Mars turned his attention to his father and raised the matter of the throne. His father, visibly shaken, insisted that it belonged to Mars. Mars then asked whether there was anyone capable of handling the kingdom's governance. Gamera's reacted in disbelief. Mars called him forward and placed him in charge of the kingdom's affairs, leaving Gamera's stunned by the decision. In the days that followed, order returned to the kingdom far faster than expected. Mars' wedding was held without delay, with Frau as his bride. She had earned the people's trust through her bravery during the Civil War. Even so, she spoke of attempting a summoning ritual involving human sacrifices, causing Mars to quietly question whether she was truly suited to be queen. Adma and the others repeatedly lectured Mars about entrusting authority to Gamras. Adma, furious, reminded him that Gamras had attempted to assassinate him and was responsible for much of the chaos. Chrome also questioned whether Mars truly intended to leave the kingdom in Gamera's hands. The question followed naturally: who would handle the kingdom's politics? The 100 were driven by the belief that only the strongest deserved authority. Under that mindset, there was no realistic way for Mars to govern directly. From that point on, Gamera's worked without rest. He devoted himself entirely to stabilizing the kingdom and managing its affairs. Gamera's later declared that Mars was a king among kings, pledging his life in service and vowing to carry out his duties without fail. After some time, the coronation was held. Chrome formally proclaimed the rise of the new ruler, naming Mars as king. The people hailed King Mars, expressing hopes that his reign would bring peace and prosperity. The 100 pledged to follow Zero wherever he would lead. Mars had only wanted to survive, yet his path of eating monster meat and enduring constant danger had led him to the throne. How King Mars would begin rebuilding the kingdom, and what awaited him beyond that, remained unknown. After some time, Adma approached Luda, the cleric healer, and requested care for a cleanly severed arm. Luda was taken aback by the sight. Time passed, and through steady work, the arm was successfully reattached. Adma reacted with open pride, praising her as their big sister and acknowledging her as a true A-rank cleric, operating on a different level. The scene shifted to the arena's ranking matches, where Adma, ranked first, faced Bruno, ranked fifth. Both belonged to the 100. The battle unfolded decisively, with Adma's clear superiority on display. In the midst of the fight, Bruno's right arm was severed, leaving the match in that state. From the stands, Mars watched the outcome and found the spectacle unsettling, questioning how events had escalated this far. Since ascending the throne, Gamera's had worked with relentless intensity. By seizing the noble's assets, the kingdom's finances had rapidly stabilized and improved. Even so, Mars had yet to properly reward the 100 for their role in the rebellion. As these thoughts settled, he arrived at a new idea: the construction of an arena. The old training grounds were no longer suitable, and presenting a new arena as a reward would likely satisfy everyone involved. Gamers questioned whether this meant turning the arena into something visible to the public. Mars clarified that it was along those lines. Gamers then pressed further, wondering if the ranking battles were meant to become a national attraction. Mars considered the implication of treating it as a government project, complete with admission fees. Gamers rejected that direction, prompting Mars to reconsider. As the realization dawned, Gamers reacted sharply, identifying gambling as the missing piece. Mars, however, was left confused, as that had not been his original intention. Gamers immediately grasped the potential in betting on the 100's ranking matches and turning the arena into a national enterprise. For a poor nation like Falloon, the idea carried clear appeal. Mars recognized the absence of a defining main industry, and Gamera's praised his foresight. She went further, suggesting that this outcome had been anticipated from the moment the 100 was organized. Mars offered only a quiet smile, accepting the direction things were taking. If it strengthened the kingdom, the method itself mattered little to him. Gamera's grew openly energized, convinced that the arena would become a major national asset. She moved at once to make the necessary arrangements. Within half a year, the arena stood completed. With gambling tied to its operation, the kingdom's revenue more than doubled, marking a sharp shift in Falloon's fortunes. The scene then shifted again. One of the 100, Aaron, arrived carrying a wounded companion, Barry, a sword still lodged in his chest. He sought out Luda, the A-rank cleric, pleading for her help. Luda assessed the situation and judged the wound fatal, stating that the body showed no sign of survival. She pointed out the contradiction in calling him a friend after inflicting such an injury. Aaron insisted that Luda was the only one capable of saving him and claimed there was still time. Luda maintained that it was beyond hope. Faced with that refusal, Aaron broke down, making it clear that he could not accept a future where Barry did not return. At that moment, Adma arrived. He intervened, urging Aaron to steady himself, then turned to Luda and pressed the situation onto her shoulders. He framed the matter as simple. If Barry was brought back, everything would be resolved. The pressure escalated as Adma implied consequences beyond this single life, making it clear that further bloodshed could follow. He left Luda with a demand and an unspoken threat, insisting that reviving Barry would settle the matter completely. The men broke down, surrounding Luda as they begged for Barry to be brought back. Luda offered her prayers with visible strain. Against all expectations, Barry's condition reversed, and his body recovered in what could only be called a miracle. Relief spread immediately. The group praised Luda as a genuine A-rank cleric, one worthy of the title. Luda shut down their enthusiasm at once, warning them not to involve her in such matters again. She made it clear that next time, the outcome would not be mercy, and that responsibility would fall squarely on those who caused the deaths. No one argued. Before long, Mars was summoned to prepare for a special match. He understood there was little room to refuse and agreed to appear. From that point on, Mars was forced to fully shoulder his role as king. In the arena, rankers like Adma fought for prize money, drawing roaring crowds and earning immense rewards. Wealth, reputation, and prestige followed them, and the 100's top members came to be treated as public figures admired throughout the kingdom. Against these rankers, Mars fought 10 matches a day. Adma pressed Mars to display his true strength once more, urging him to remove the armlets he had worn since the rebellion. The demands for matches never ceased, and Mars eventually proposed a solution. Anyone who won a ranking match would be granted a special match afterward. His intent was simple: to deal with their dissatisfaction all at once and bring the challenges to an end. The plan failed to curb their enthusiasm. Warren pointed out that he had already earned his 5th special match. Aaron noted that he was on his 7th. Adma went further, having participated in 100 matches without missing a single one. As these claims stacked up, Mars found himself increasingly worn down, wishing they would show even a hint of restraint instead of repeatedly pressing him for special matches. Adma and Warren pressed their attack on Mars, convinced that this would finally be the day they claimed a victory. Their resolve did not waver. No matter how many times they were struck down, they continued to rise and charge again. To Mars, this seemed less like warriors and more like the undead. The challengers crowded in around him, shouting his name as king and lord, their voices swelling with fervor. Mars could not help questioning why it was always him. He had been forced into these special matches almost every day, while everyone else enjoyed 5 full days of rest. His thoughts drifted to Gamera's and the way he treated these matches, as if Mars were some kind of gladiator slave. Whenever the king appeared in a special match, the crowds multiplied, and Gamera's had insisted they capitalize on that momentum as much as possible. No matter how many challengers Mars defeated, they continued to return. The reason was clear: Luida's healing. Mars had hired her to treat injuries, but he had never imagined it would spiral into something this relentless. At times, he wanted to voice his frustration to Gamera's, but the sight of him told another story. Gamera's had worked himself to the edge, his body thinning as he labored endlessly for the sake of the kingdom. Mars found himself unable to fault him. Another victory was secured for King Mars, bringing the day's ranking matches to a close. Yet even as the crowd settled, it was clear this was not the end. What followed would be far worse. Elsewhere, Luida trembled as she prayed, invoking cleansing magic to purge poison from her body. She questioned how she had ended up consuming tainted food, even as she continued casting detoxification on herself. At the same time, in a separate dining room, Mars raised a different concern, asking whether the rumors about killer rabbits were true. Gamera's confirmed that they had nearly disappeared, having almost vanished from the territory. Mars reacted with disbelief, noting that he had never heard of monsters going extinct. In his understanding, they were meant to appear endlessly. He reasoned that the creatures might have been driven out of the territory rather than truly wiped out. Gamera's added another troubling detail. Recently, even dragons had begun avoiding the skies above the kingdom. Among the 100, dragon hunts had become fiercely competitive due to the value of dragon meat. Frau's mage corps had also joined these hunts, lending their magic to the pursuit. The idea that even dragons were fleeing made Mars uneasy. He wondered what kind of death trap the kingdom was gradually becoming. Still, he questioned whether fewer monsters was truly a bad thing. Killer rabbits, in particular, had long damaged crops and injured residents. Gamers responded that the situation was not so simple. For those unaccustomed, meat from monsters stronger than killer rabbits was highly toxic, and new recruits to the 100 could not adapt to it. Mars found the logic baffling. If the meat was poisonous and foul, he saw no reason to eat it all, preferring something genuinely palatable. He suggested that if killer rabbit meat was so valued, they could simply be raised instead. Gamera's paused, clarifying the implication of raising monsters. Setting aside conventional thinking to propose something so extreme, he expressed deep admiration for the idea. Mars immediately sensed the danger. Gamera's was taking the suggestion seriously. If the kingdom truly began breeding monsters for food, other nations would see them as completely unhinged. Mars clarified that the idea was not about food. Gamera's immediately shifted direction, interpreting it as a form of spectacle. Mars rejected that as well, unsettled by how quickly the conclusion was reached. Gamera's paused, then advanced yet another possibility, breeding monsters as a foundation for military expansion. Mars reacted instinctively, caught off guard as the implications unfolded. Gamera's grew animated, praising the concept as visionary. He pointed to the northern kingdoms, where dragons were raised and riders trained, and proposed following the same path by incorporating monsters into Falloon's military strength. Mars struggled to follow the reasoning. The thought of breeding monsters for warfare felt unreal, bordering on absurd. He briefly questioned whether his rule had taken such a dark turn. Gamera's continued, weighing the possibilities. Whether for resources, display, or combat, raising monsters carried undeniable potential. Difficult as it would be, he believed it was an idea worth pursuing. Mars tried to object, repeatedly pushing back, but his voice failed him. He suddenly realized he could no longer speak. Turning around, Mars saw Frau standing behind him. A contract seal bound the two of them. It was clear she had overheard the discussion and arrived instantly. Some form of magic was already in effect, suppressing his voice. The cause was unmistakable. Mars sought confirmation from her intentions, and her quiet reaction was enough. In that moment, he understood resistance was futile. If Frau had taken interest, there was no stopping her. Attempting to restrain her would only invite backlash once her fixation was denied. That outcome would be catastrophic. Thus, the notion of breeding monsters for military use took shape. What Mars did not realize then was that the unchecked, relentless hunting of monsters across the land would one day ignite a calamity far greater than anyone had anticipated. In the kingdom of Falloon, a plan for mass-producing monsters had already begun. Frau appeared pleased by it. Yet the idea of turning monsters into military power lingered uneasily. Falloon was a small, remote kingdom, unlikely to be targeted by invasion. If Mars could step away from this path, perhaps 100 could take his place in the upcoming special match. Nearby, Chrome approached King Mars and presented a gravity bracelet designed to match him. With it, Chrome intended to remain just slightly closer to the king at all times. Mars examined the item and immediately recognized it as a prisoner shackle. It had originally been created to prevent escapes, infused with heavy gravity to restrain movement. Such bracelets were routinely imposed on criminals who committed offenses in foreign lands. Now, that same device was being handled by what were supposed to be the elite soldiers of his own kingdom. Even so, Mars acknowledged that he himself was hardly in a position to judge. Frau then offered Mars a bracelet of her own. It was a gift she had personally crafted. Enchanting it with fivefold gravity had been an extremely difficult task. That level of magic was exceptionally high. Mars judged that a bracelet with triple gravity was already sufficient, and that fivefold gravity would interfere with everyday life. Frau's expression hardened as she brought up the name Cassandra and pointed out that Mars had already worn bracelets given by Cassandra and other women. Mars reacted with visible shock. Through the contract sigil between them, Frau was always aware of Mars. When it came to him, nothing escaped her notice. Even the existence of Cassandra, Mars' master, was something only Frau knew. The poison ring and the triple gravity bracelet Mars was currently wearing had both come from his master. In truth, their effects were simply oppressive rather than helpful. Mars acknowledged that a hint of jealousy could be endearing, yet he wished Frau would not compete in this manner. If it was meant to be a gift, something focused on protection would have been preferable, an enchanted item designed to keep him safe rather than burden him. Frau answered without hesitation, treating the act of strengthening her husband as a wife's responsibility. Mars questioned that logic in silence. Frau watched him closely and pressed for an answer. Mars hesitated, uncertain of her intentions. Still, he understood how much effort she devoted to him. When others urged her to dissolve their engagement, she had refused outright. During the recent rebellion, she had even risked her life for his sake. Mars did not dislike Frau. Though she lacked some warmth in her expressions, she was precious to him as his wife. In the end, Mars accepted the gravity bracelet Frau had made and expressed his gratitude. The moment he settled back, the throne failed to endure the added weight and shattered beneath him. As the fragments scattered across the throne room, a guard stepped forward and reported the arrival of a messenger from the kingdom of Cadia, formally announcing the envoy's presence. Cadia was a neighboring nation that shared a border with the demon beast forest. Its history was longer than Falloon's, and it was regarded as a higher-ranked kingdom. Both countries struggled against the same forest, making continued diplomacy a sensible choice. As Mars read the letter sent by Cadia's king, he noted that it was one of the few moments where he was performing a truly kingly duty. That feeling faded quickly. His expression stiffened as he realized the contents were nothing more than a formal complaint. The letter accused Falloon of excessive monster hunting that had disrupted the forest's ecosystem. Monsters displaced by that imbalance were now overflowing into Cadia's territory and causing damage. Falloon was being demanded to take responsibility by hunting monsters within Cadia's lands and paying 3,000 gold coins as compensation. Mars grasped the severity of the situation immediately. Their aggressive subjugation had driven even dragons away from Falloon's territory. It was inevitable that the surrounding nations would be affected. The consequences were real, and the fault was undeniable. He passed the letter to Gamorous. Upon reading it, Gamorous understood that Cadia was directly blaming Falloon for its monster crisis, a claim he found difficult to accept. Gamorous reacted strongly, insisting that each nation bore responsibility for its own monster control and questioning whether Cadia lacked national pride. Lord Odd responded calmly, explaining that Cadia had managed the issue independently until recent years. Falloon's rapid expansion and relentless hunting within the Demon Beast Forest had driven monsters outward, overwhelming Cadia's defenses and pushing them to their limits. Mars acknowledged the damage his kingdom's reckless actions had caused. Then Warren spoke up, reiterating that Falloon's national policy centered on monster subjugation and forest development. From that perspective, he argued that Falloon had no reason to be condemned by another nation for pursuing its chosen path. Adma added his voice to the exchange, dismissing the situation outright. To him, an increase in monsters was something a nation should simply eliminate on its own, and he regarded Cadia's complaint as weak. Aaron followed with an equally blunt stance, treating monsters as resources to be consumed and pointing out that Falloon was actually lacking them. Mars understood that Aaron's way of thinking was far from universal. He felt genuine sympathy for Cadia's position. Lord Odd was fully aware that the demand he carried was unreasonable from a diplomatic perspective. However, the king of Cadia was enraged, and as a diplomat, Lord Odd had no choice but to present those demands to Falloon. More than anything, he wanted to return home. King Mars unsettled him. When Lord Odd looked toward the throne, Mars met his gaze with a quiet smile that only deepened the unease. At first glance, King Mars appeared to be nothing more than an ordinary noble. Yet Lord Odd had heard the rumors. A delinquent prince on the brink of disinheritance, who, upon facing a loss of his claim, took the name Mars, gathered outlaws, and ignited a rebellion. Nobles who opposed him were slaughtered. It was said that he forced his followers to consume poisonous monster flesh as proof of loyalty, and after ascending the throne, he built an arena where subordinates were made to fight. All of it for gambling, revenue, and amusement. To Lord Odd, Mars was the very image of a mad king. There was no chance such a ruler would accept Cadia's absurd demands. Gamorous moved to shut the matter down entirely, treating it as resolved. Then Mars made his decision and declared that Falloon would comply with Cadia's request. The response stunned everyone present. Mars assessed the situation calmly. His kingdom was full of people eager to hunt monsters, and the arena was already generating immense profit. There was no real loss to be had. More importantly, maintaining good relations with neighboring nations was the wiser course. Chrome was visibly shocked, urging King Mars to reconsider. He warned that accepting such a demand would make Falloon appear weak and invite ridicule. Mars acknowledged Chrome's point, understanding that he meant the kingdom should not appear soft in negotiations. Yet the reality was clear. The problem had originated in Falloon, and Mars had his own reason for the decision. He saw an opportunity to take Frau on a trip to another country. Over the next month, he planned to prepare for the expedition. Mars instructed Captain Chrome and the Black Knights to assist Cadia with monster subjugation during that period. Chrome immediately affirmed the order, then paused in surprise, muttering a confused, "Wait, what?" Mars turned to Lord Odd for confirmation. He asked whether it would be acceptable for Falloon's forces to enter Cadia while conducting monster control operations. Lord Odd replied without hesitation. There was no issue, no objections whatsoever, and he expressed deep gratitude for the king's generosity. Later, Chrome pressed for an explanation, asking Mars to clarify his reasoning in a way they could understand. Mars paused, realizing that a simple admission that he wanted to visit another country with Frau would not suffice. He needed a plausible justification. Snapping his fingers, Mars delivered his answer. He claimed there was a risk of a monster stampede. The declaration widened everyone's eyes. Gamera's repeated it in disbelief, noting that the king was considering the danger of stampede. A stampede with a sudden surge of an overwhelming number of monsters. Its precise triggers were not fully understood, but excessive hunting was known to provoke one. At this moment, monster activity in Cadia was escalating, making the warning credible. King Mars explained that any further provocation of the monsters could trigger a stampede, and if that happened, Cadia would face disaster. Gamera's understood immediately, agreeing that the potential losses for Cadia would be catastrophic. He confirmed that this was precisely why they needed to subjugate the monsters in advance. Mars felt a quiet relief. His excuse had been accepted, and the logic was sound. If a stampede struck Cadia, Falloon would also be at risk. In that sense, the expedition served as both a diplomatic mission and national defense. Mars couldn't help but marvel at how convincingly he had framed his own excuse. Turning to Chrome, he asked if he now understood. Chrome nodded, acknowledging the depth of Mars' reasoning and wisdom. He resolved that the Black Knights would take full responsibility for subjugating the monsters in Cadia and would carry out the task without fail. Mars noted that they were far too fired up about the mission, but at least their motivation was strong. A month later, the expedition finally began. Mars found himself anticipating the journey with Frau, thinking this would be their first proper trip together. The monster subjugation should have been completed by now, and the king of Cadia should be ready to welcome them. Yet as he surveyed the scene, he wondered how this had escalated into such a massive operation. Mars had expected a diplomatic envoy, mostly officials and scholars. Instead, it resembled a full-scale military campaign. Adma called out, informing Mars that they had arrived at the capital, Moss. Mars froze in disbelief. The capital was entirely encircled by monsters. He could not understand why. They were supposed to have been exterminated by the Black Knights already. Half a month earlier, Chrome reflected on King Mars' foresight. At first, he had not understood why Mars had agreed to Cadia's demands. Now, everything fell into place. Mars must have anticipated that Cadia would make such a foolish request. Or perhaps he had deliberately pushed for aggressive development in the Demon Beast Forest to create an opportunity. The truth became clear. Mars had never been genuinely concerned about a stampede. If anything, he intended to use it as a strategic weapon, turning the chaos to his advantage and bringing Cadia under his control. Chrome scattered a black liquid throughout the forest. He knew that Falloon had been researching ways to mass-produce monsters, and this liquid was one of their latest developments. Spread across Cadia's lands, it would irresistibly draw monsters, concentrating them in a single area. Cadia would suffer devastating losses, but Mars had already planned the next step. At the peak of the stampede, he and Lady Frau would arrive to save the towns and villages under attack, establishing a foothold in Cadia while appearing as the kingdom's saviors. Chrome laughed, calling the strategy brilliant. Every move Mars made was flawless. To him, this operation marked the first step toward Mars' conquest of the Ares continent. Long live the king. Back in the present, Adma reported that it appeared the Black Knights had executed the plan perfectly. Mars frowned in confusion, asking what plan. Adma's response only added to the confusion, and Mars pressed further, insisting that of course they were helping Cadia. With a decisive tone, Mars commanded that every last one of the surrounding monsters be exterminated. Monsters swarmed the royal capital of Moss. The situation makes no sense, as Chrome and his men were supposed to have already handled the threat. With no time to unravel the failure, only one course of action remains: the complete eradication of every monster in sight. The numbers are overwhelming, far more than expected. Mars is aware that lingering here risks making him late for his meeting with the king of Cadia. Yet the battlefield offers no room for delay. Frau begins an incantation, calling forth darkness tied to the abyss. Black flames rise from the underworld, swallowing the monsters in a void-like blaze. Mars recognizes the spell's power as it tears through the horde with ruthless efficiency. Mars dispatches the Black Knights to contain and eliminate the remaining monsters. As they move, he notes how the situation continues to deteriorate, with chaos now reaching even the heart of the capital. Nearby, a man approaches and expresses his gratitude for the intervention. He introduces himself as George, the captain of the knights tasked with guarding Moss. Mars takes the opportunity to request that an audience with the king of Cadia be arranged. As the request is made, Mars quietly considers how the scale of the disaster could be explained. The answer comes immediately and cuts short that concern. The king of Cadia is no longer in Moss. George reports that once word of the approaching monster horde arrived, the king fled the capital alongside the royal guard, abandoning the city in the face of the invasion. Relief settles over Mars at the realization that no apology will be necessary. If the monsters are eliminated now, he considers that the king may overlook everything once he returns. Mars asks whether the monster attacks are limited to Moss or if other cities across Cadia are also under threat. George confirms that the damage has spread and admits that their forces lack the strength to contain the outbreaks. The situation worsens in Mars's assessment. If the destruction continues to expand, no amount of compensation will be sufficient to cover the losses. Mars states that he understands and declares that his forces will handle the situation. George reacts with confusion, insisting that they cannot allow the kingdom of Falloon to shoulder such a burden. The pride of Cadia, he argues, cannot be cast aside so easily. Mars presses the issue, questioning whether that pride is worth sacrificing their people. George has no answer to that, only acknowledgement. At that moment, Adma approaches and reports that the sweep outside the castle is complete. Most of the monsters that breach the interior have also been eliminated. Disbelief crosses George's face as he takes in the report. The scale of the victory is difficult to comprehend. Mars acknowledges the effort, recognizing the results achieved in such a short time. Observing his forces, he notes that these are the kind of warriors who would wipe monsters from the world without hesitation. With Moss secured, the 100 begin moving out toward the rest of Cadia. Their objective is absolute eradication. Not a single monster will be allowed to escape. All of it is carried out in service to the king. Just before Mars and his forces reach Moss, the king of Cadia reflects on how the situation has spiraled out of control. Monsters now surround the nation, pressing in from all sides. Collapse feels unavoidable. Anger follows that realization. The plan had been simple. File a formal complaint with Falloon and have the monsters exterminated before they reached this point. That was what had been promised. Frustration boils over as the king demands to know what the Falloon soldiers have been doing, questioning why the monsters were not thinned out as agreed. His attendants confirm that the Black Knights were dispatched to subjugate the beasts within the demon forests. Doubt creeps in. The king begins to suspect foul play, wondering whether the Black Knights orchestrated this outcome, or whether the entire situation was a scheme devised by the kingdom of Falloon from the very beginning. The thought leaves him deeply unsettled. A scream suddenly cuts through the air. The king steps out of his carriage to investigate and is met with a horrifying sight. His guards lie slaughtered, their bodies scattered, the path ahead drenched in blood. Confusion grips him as he tries to understand what is happening. At that moment, Chrome appears before him and calmly announces his presence, formally identifying himself and his role. Recognition strikes the king immediately, realizing that the man before him belongs to the Black Knights. He challenges Chrome, pointing out that they were tasked with defeating the monsters and questioning whether that promise has been broken. Chrome denies any breach of agreement. He explains that a significant number of monsters have already been eliminated and that by the time the forces arrived, the invading horde had been greatly reduced. The king presses further, demanding to know why Cadia remains under attack despite those efforts. Chrome responds by outlining a fundamental trait of monsters. When large numbers are slain, the lingering sin of death can attract even stronger predators. Incomplete extermination does not end a threat. It amplifies it, drawing in more dangerous forces to replace those that fell. The king of Cadia dismisses the explanation as nonsense. In all his years, he has never heard of a monster stampede being caused by successful extermination alone. Chrome responds by revealing that there is another factor at play. Chrome produces a potion developed by Falloon's alchemists. He explains that it is designed to attract monsters. The substance had been spread from the demon beast forest all the way to moss, and when mixed with monster blood, its effects increase exponentially. The revelation shocks the king. The implication becomes immediately clear. The stampede was not an accident. It was engineered. The king grasps the truth that Chrome deliberately triggered the disaster. Chrome does not deny it, acknowledging that their actions directly led to the stampede. Chrome's tone hardens as he places responsibility squarely on the king. By inviting foreign knights into his land, the chain of events had been set in motion. Without that decision, none of this would have occurred. The realization leaves the king visibly shaken. The king questions why Falloon had not simply refused the request, insisting there was no justification for taking matters this far. Chrome answers by stating that every reckless decision made by Cadia had already been accounted for. All of it unfolded according to King Mars' design. With no more need for explanations, Chrome moves to conclude the encounter. He throws the potion directly at the king, making clear that it remains effective even without monster blood. Panic overtakes the king. In desperation, he offers payment, pledging land, titles, and any reward demanded in exchange for allegiance and mercy. The plea ends abruptly. Chrome drives his sword into the king of Cadia, bringing the confrontation to a decisive and irreversible end. Chrome states that such offers are meaningless to Falloon. In their country, there are no knights who would sell their loyalty for money or land. Soon after, monsters converge on the fallen king. His body is overtaken and devoured as the beasts swarm the area, ending the ruler of Cadia in the midst of the chaos he fled. 3 days later, the atmosphere in Cadia shifts. The people express their gratitude toward Mars, declaring that Moss has been saved and hailing him as the savior of the kingdom. Mars observes the outcome calmly. The monsters have been crushed, and peace has returned to Cadia with little resistance. That result is acceptable. What troubles him is the death of Cadia's king. With no ruler left to raise complaints, there is also no clear path for Mars to simply return to Falloon. After arriving in Moss, Mars dispatches his escort knights to continue hunting remaining monsters. He personally travels to the most heavily damaged cities, assisting with recovery efforts and distributing gold to those affected. He considers the implications. Spending Falloon's gold for Cadia's sake may establish a precedent. Perhaps it will prevent disputes over reparations later. Judging by the reactions around him, the funds appear well spent. The people are relieved, grateful, and at ease. Once the situation stabilizes, Mars reunites with the Black Knights in Moss. Chrome reports the official account to Cadian officials. The king perished during a monster attack. His remains were discovered along the highway, torn apart by beasts. The scene had been devastating. The officials react with anger and disbelief. After abandoning the capital, the king had met his end alone. To them, it was an unforgivable disgrace. With the kingdom left leaderless, unrest spreads among the population. Many declare that they can no longer remain in a country like this. One by one, they pledge their allegiance to the kingdom of Falloon. The development catches Mars off guard. The people offer their thanks once more, expressing gratitude for their salvation and for the gold Mars provided during the recovery. Amid the aftermath, Captain George approaches Mars and requests a private audience. He explains that the Princess of Cadia wishes to meet him. Princess Rubis remained within the castle throughout the entire crisis. Unlike the others, she never fled. Captain George conveys the princess's words exactly as they were given. She was moved by the accounts of King Mars saving the people of Cadia and wished to meet him. Mars agrees to the meeting. George adds one condition. The princess requests that it remain strictly confidential, arranged as a private dinner with Mars alone. Mars accepts without objection, though he pauses briefly. Even if the meeting is secret, he knows that Frau will hear everything through the contract mark regardless. Elsewhere, Princess Rubis reflects on the future of Cadia. The royal family has lost all credibility. The king died in disgrace, fleeing and falling to monsters. In contrast, the people now revere Mars, a foreign king. He restored order, saved Moss, and scattered gold across the devastated regions. Naturally, he won their hearts. The source of that gold is no mystery to her. It came from the reparations her father demanded from Falloon. The realization unsettles her. Every piece fits together too cleanly. Falloon's willingness to accept the reparations had never made sense. Even then, it felt wrong. Now, looking back, the strangeness is impossible to ignore. Princess Rubis considers the possibility that it was all orchestrated. Cadenia's own demands turned against them. A monster stampede deliberately triggered. Chaos used as justification. A foreign king stepping in as savior. The conclusion is chilling. King Mars is cold, precise, and calculating. Even if she were to cry out now and accuse Falloon of planning everything, there is no proof. Without evidence, it would sound like nothing more than a desperate excuse from a disgraced royal family. Worse still, Falloon's reputation for strength and generosity is widely admired. The people would never believe her. Mars continues to win the hearts of the population, not only through power, but through calculated benevolence. Publicly, he is hailed as a hero. Quietly, whispers follow him. Behind his back, he is called the Mad King. Princess Rubis understands what that name truly means. He is dangerous. If King Mars fully takes control of Cadia, she fears the tragedy that may follow. Perhaps she alone can see it now. And because she is the princess of this nation, she knows what that realization demands of her. For the sake of Cadia and its people, Princess Rubis resolves to act. She decides that she will be the one to take King Mars's life. Oh, you're still here? The subscribe button is literally glowing. Press it before it powers up again. Meanwhile, inside the castle of Cadia, a firm voice raised the question of whether the attempt on King Mars's life had been justified. Lady Rubis affirmed it. From her view, the earlier stampede had not been an accident, but a deliberate move, part of a design by Mars to fold Cadia into Falloon territory. She laid out the situation plainly. The hearts of the people were already leaning toward Mars, and much of southern Cadia had slipped under Falloon control. If their nation was to be preserved, Mars had to be defeated. Captain George pressed the reality they all understood. No one in their country possessed the strength to overcome that man. When Mars and his 100 knights entered Moss, they erased threats even Cadenia's standing forces could not handle. Those soldiers were, in every sense, living legends. Rubis presented the only path she believed remained. They would poison him. George echoed the plan in disbelief. Mars's wife, Lady Frau, was a formidable magician. If she were nearby, any attempt could be uncovered by magic before it took effect. Rubis answered that Mars would be targeted when he was alone. A private dinner would be arranged, attended only by the king and herself. Then she asked for George's cooperation. Someone had to make sure Cadia would not suffer blind retaliation afterward. The responsibility needed to rest solely on her. She intended to conclude the matter with her own life. The meeting was set, and the food was placed before the king. Mars received it with open appreciation, recognizing it as court cuisine of Cadia and accepting the hospitality without reserve. He had truly come by himself. The sight unsettled Rubis. Facing a ruler who arrived without guards stirred a quiet guilt in her chest. Yet at the same time, it simplified everything. Every dish on the table carried poison. The preparation allowed her to answer, even if he requested that their plates be exchanged. Once he consumed enough, the outcome would be unavoidable. Rubis waited for the moment when the king's body would finally give in, expecting the end to come there at the table. Rubis had never carried out a scheme like this before, and the strain began to show. Across the table, Mars read her stiffness differently. To him, she looked young, earnest, even a little endearing. He brought the conversation to the reason for the meeting, noting that she had asked to see him and inviting her to present what she wished to discuss. Rubis introduced her grandfather, Duke Gordon, a leading noble of northern Cadia. If the topic turned to politics, she was certain Mars would follow it. Mars continued eating, remarking on the elegance of the traditional dishes before him. Rubis watched every movement, searching for any sign that the poison had been noticed. She needed him to keep going. She affirmed that the cuisine had come out particularly well this time, and gently pressed whether it suited his taste. Mars answered with an easy laugh. The spices pleased him. The sharpness landed exactly where he liked it. He continued from plate to plate without slowing. Rubis studied him, tried to understand what kind of man could consume so much of it so happily. Leaning aside, she murmured to Captain George about what she was seeing. George murmured back that the king's portions had certainly been prepared the same way. A chill passed through her. The antidote she had taken was not flawless. If she continued sharing the meal, the danger would eventually reach her as well. The more she watched him, the further he seemed from anything human. Mars, meanwhile, kept his thoughts on what awaited him after dinner. Cadian politics still needed to be handled, and he had already begun forming an idea. He asked her age. Rubis answered that she was 14. Mars nodded, saying he had expected as much. His younger brother was the same age, and when he first saw her, he had thought the two of them might be alike. As the meal continued, Mars considered a simple solution. Cadenia's leadership could be handed to Nickel. If his brother stood beside Rubis, someone the same age, the governance of the region would likely settle into place. Rubis struggled to follow the direction of his thinking. The idea sounded like a proposal, and the possibility of a political marriage began to take shape in her mind. From her perspective, Mars was arranging for her to wed his younger brother so the annexation of Cadia could proceed without resistance. The realization chilled her. It felt as if their careful preparations had been transparent from the start, as though every move had unfolded within his grasp. Mars asked what she thought of it. Nickel was capable in political matters, and he was confident the two of them would work well together. Rubis aimed to refuse with proper royal restraint, yet the poison clouding her senses reminded her that time was running short. She needed to end the audience and secure the antidote. She answered that she would consider the idea favorably. Mars received that response with satisfaction. Rubis rose, offered her leave, and moved to depart. Mars watched her go, puzzled that the dinner was ending while dishes still remained. The meeting concluded without open trouble. At once, Mars reached out through magic to Gamera's back home and informed him of his wish to place Nickel in charge of Cadia. Gamera's reacted with surprise, but accepted the command. Understanding the meaning behind it, Gamera's concluded that Nickel would be expected to marry the princess of Cadia and take the throne there. His thoughts drifted to the past. Nickel, Mars's half-brother and his own grandson, had once stood in mortal danger. When Mars rose to power, Gamera's had believed the boy would be eliminated. They had even positioned Mars at the center of the earlier assassination scheme. Yet Mars allowed Nickel to live. Now, Gamera's saw it differently. The life that had been spared had been preserved for a purpose. He felt admiration for the depth of Mars's foresight. Gamera's cried out in awe, calling Mars's name and expressing gratitude for granting Nickel such a favorable match. Time passed, and Nickel stood before the king to offer his thanks in person. He accepted the responsibility that had been placed on him and pledged that he would live up to it. Mars found himself wondering why Nickel had brought his mother along, and what this talk of a fine match truly meant. Even so, he noted that Nickel's resolve was firm. He instructed his brother to cooperate with Lady Rubis and give the role his full effort. Nickel then asked where the princess was. Mars answered that she remained in the castle, though reports said she had fallen ill. Close by, Chrome asked whether he should accompany Nickel. Mars agreed without hesitation. A simple tour of the castle posed no problem. With Chrome present, there would be no disturbances. Mars left the matter in his hands, and Chrome accepted the order. Not long after, a scream cut through the corridor. Knights of Cadia lay defeated, brought down by Chrome as he advanced. He asked them calmly not to interfere and questioned whether they truly meant to block the path of the man who would become Cadenia's future king. Captain George hurried to the scene and called for restraint. He acknowledged Chrome's service to the ruler of Falloon, but insisted that such force was unnecessary. Chrome answered that Nickel had traveled far to see his future wife and asked whether that wish could not be granted, even a little. Nickel stepped forward and declared that the arrangement had already been concluded. His grandfather Gamera's and the princess's grandfather, Duke Gordon, had both received it warmly. Their thanks had even been directed to King Mars. George rejected the claim outright, certain that Duke Gordon would never agree to something like that. Nickel responded that Rubis would become Queen of Cadia, and that the outcome was hardly a poor one. Then he asked George whether he truly wanted the princess's conduct toward his brother to be made public. Frustration surfaced across George's face. George demanded to know what Nickel meant. Nickel answered that it was no different from any other land. Everywhere they went, someone tried to kill his brother, and he regarded it as foolish. With a thin smile, he stated that a true king would never fall to ordinary men. Beside him, Chrome told George to choose, adding that resistance or surrender made little difference to him. George lowered himself. There was nothing left for him to do. At that moment, Rubis stepped out from her room and told him it was fine. She asked Nickel to come speak with her, but without anyone else present. Nickel accepted. Inside, Rubis asked what they wanted from Cadia. Nickel answered that they wanted nothing. Their aim was simply to build a better Cadia together. Rubis replied that the country had been good before Falloon ever appeared. Nickel found the statement curious. If it had truly been good, the people would not have turned toward his brother so easily. If it had truly been governed well, no outside force would have found cause to intervene. He asked her who she believed a nation existed for. She answered that it was for its people. All the more reason, Nickel said, for Cadia to stand with Falloon. No ruler valued the people the way his brother did. Rubis rejected that outright. Even children knew the stories of Falloon's Mad King. Wherever he marched, blood and bodies were said to follow. He had taken power alongside bandits, cut down the nobility, consumed the flesh of monsters, and raised an arena for his own entertainment. Before calling such a man a king, she questioned whether he could even be considered decent. Nickel admitted that he could not deny the accusations. Even so, he stated that his brother had never laid a hand on civilians. The blades of Falloon had been turned toward nobles who abandoned their duties and toward monsters that threatened towns and villages. Because of that, Mars held the backing of Falloon's people, and now many in Cadia supported him as well. He went on to explain that with Falloon's nobility removed, there were no intermediaries siphoning away taxes. The nation's revenue had increased while the weight on its citizens had grown lighter. In such conditions, he said, it was only natural that no one spoke ill of Mars. Rubis struggled to accept it. The intensity drained from her expression, replaced by a fragile calm as the foundation of what she believed seemed to give way all at once. Nickel invited her to visit Falloon someday and witness it with her own eyes. He added that he was pleased his future bride was both sharp and charming. In time, the two of them were wed in a ceremony of great scale. With that union, Cadia was formally brought under Falloon. Mars welcomed the prospect of peaceful relations with the region, yet he still found himself uncertain how those two had ended up marrying in the first place. Elsewhere inside the castle, King Dorson received a plea for assistance in reclaiming the kingdom of Cadia. He regarded the visiting royals with quiet contempt. If they, and their late king, had possessed even a trace of ability, Falloon would never have taken their land so easily. Since the rise of the one now called the Mad King, Falloon itself had changed. What once appeared small and harmless had used the chaos of the stampede as cover, swallowing Cadia in a single night. The territory remained limited, not yet a true danger, but its hunger had begun to show. To Dorson, Mars was nothing more than an arrogant upstart, growing bolder than his position allowed. Even so, Dorson declared that he understood the situation. Falloon's aggression was not something he could ignore. The displaced royals answered with gratitude. Behind his composed expression, he settled on a different design. Once Cadia was reclaimed, the pair would sit on the throne, but only as figures in name. Through them, he would watch and listen. The first move would be a formal demand, delivered under the banner of diplomacy, ordering Falloon to return the crown. Peaceful compliance would be convenient, yet he judged it unlikely. The path ahead would probably lead to war. And if victory came, he would rule from the shadows while the so-called rightful heirs stood in front to bear whatever followed. What became of the kingdom after that meant little. What mattered was stopping Falloon's ascent before it could spread any further. The scene shifted to Mars. A report reached him. A demand had arrived calling for the throne to be handed to Cadia's former crown prince. He saw confirmation of its origin, and Gamera's affirmed that it had indeed come from King Dorson. A second report followed. Another letter had arrived, this one from Nickel. Its contents pointed toward a strong chance of war with Dorson and urged the deployment of Falloon's most powerful forces. Mars struggled to accept it. Nickel had always seemed the quiet, studious sort. Cadia had been entrusted to him precisely because it appeared to be the safest way to keep the region calm. In truth, Mars had never been attached to the territory. It was troublesome and had not belonged to them in the first place. Yet somewhere along the way, Nickel had married the princess and taken the crown. Mars tried to remember how it had unfolded, recalling how quickly the marriage had been arranged. Now Dorson stood on the other side. Around him, the hundreds stirred with renewed energy, already leaning toward war. Warren pushed forward with open enthusiasm, proposing they turn the threat around and strike Dorson instead. He framed it as a show of strength, arguing that Cadia must already be trembling under the pressure, and placed the role at the feet of the Red Knight. Mars could only look on, uncertain how the conversation had advanced so far. He turned to Gamera's, seeking to know whether he opposed the idea. Gamers received it differently, praising the timing. To him, the conflict aligned perfectly with the debut of the monster army, another move that seemed to fit the pattern of Mars's foresight. Mars found himself unable to follow their reasoning. War was the last thing he wanted. A quiet peace suited him far better. He urged restraint, reminding them there was no need to rush forward carelessly. Two voices answered in agreement, emphasizing the need for proper preparation. Mars wondered whether they were all truly speaking about the same thing. Beyond the castle walls, Agma welcomed the arrival of his elite warriors. He relayed Dorson's demand to surrender Cadia and pressed them with a single question, whether they intended to let it be taken. The response came as one. They refused. Anger surged through the ranks as they called for Dorson's thieves to be crushed and made to pay for the insult. From the castle window, Mars watched his forces gather below. No one had asked for his leave, yet the speeches had already begun, and Dorson had been cast as the enemy. He could not help but wonder whether declaring war inside another man's hall without permission was itself a form of aggression. Agma continued, laying out the reality of the opponent. Dorson's army was disciplined, properly armed, and expected to outnumber them 5-1. A stir ran through the men, but Agma immediately reduced the figure to something simpler. Each of them would only need to take 5. He presented it as a manageable task. Mars stared down at the formation, unable to follow the logic. War, treated like arithmetic, as if it were nothing more than dividing numbers. Agma pressed them further, asking whether any among the 100 doubted they could handle that much. He raised his own stake first, declaring himself the strongest and promising to return with 50 heads to lay before King Zeros. Frustration tightened in Mars's chest. It was not what he wanted. The rest answered Agma's call with rising heat. They shouted their own numbers, 10, 20, 30, voices stacking upon voices, pledging trophies from Dorson's ranks in the king's name. Mars kept his expression still, though unease crept in. The worth of a life seemed to be dissolving right in front of him. He found himself wondering what he would even do if such promises were kept. He turned to Gameras, searching for some sign that the wider people might resist the tide. Instead, he was told the opposite. Support was already there. The scene shifted to Cadia. Crowds called for punishment, demanding an answer to Dorson's insult. They placed their faith in the 100 and spoke of the moment Zeros' name would travel across the continent. Mars understood then that the path behind him had closed. As the anti-Dorson War Council continued to show its readiness, he allowed a small smile to settle on his face. There would be no avoiding what was coming. With that acceptance, he gave the order. Falloon would go to war. Time passed, and Mars made his way to the site of the monster mass production program. The project operated under Frau's authority, overseen by one of her mages. He had left it alone until now, but with war approaching, he needed to witness it himself. A young woman stepped forward and introduced herself as Keely, a servant of Frau devoted to monster research. Mars recalled hearing that she came from a mage nation of Kiel and asked what had brought her to Falloon. Keely spoke openly. Kiel honored magic above all else. Yet in her eyes it carried a fatal blind spot. The nation refused to recognize the value of studying monsters. She treated the risks as necessary for advancement and considered what others called damage to be the price of progress. In the end, a single incident had been enough for them to cast her out. A faint smile touched Mars's face as he filled in the rest on his own. A creation had run wild. People had died. The conclusion was simple. Keely herself was dangerous. He glanced toward Frau at his side. She answered with an easy wave. Despite his doubts, Mars decided he might as well continue. He asked about the state of the project. Keely's enthusiasm surfaced at once. Everything was moving smoothly. Constructing such a force had always been her dream. In Kiel it had been forbidden, but here in Falloon she had been allowed freedom, and she intended to devote everything she had to it. Mars absorbed that in silence. An army of monsters, as someone's lifelong ambition, made it easy to understand why she had been expelled. He did not remember granting unlimited permission, yet the uses were obvious. War, provisions, spectacle. Titles had a way of shaping how others interpreted a king. Keely then mentioned what she had heard of him. A ruler who had seized power with criminals at his back, who broke those who opposed him, and who now governed without restraint. Mars stood there, caught off guard, realizing just how far his image had drifted from his own sense of it. King Mars listened, a trace of disbelief in his expression. To Keely, he sounded far from villainous. In the mage world, he was a legend. She had heard of his willingness to allow human experimentation for magical progress and spoke with unrestrained enthusiasm. Magic first, life second. Falloon had become a haven for brilliant, exiled mages like her, and King Mars found himself absorbing the praise in silence. He thought of the exiles she mentioned, all driven out for unethical research, and wondered why they were flocking to Falloon. For the record, the human testing was Frau's doing, not his. Keely moved on, detailing the strides in monster farming. Even the near-extinct killer rabbits had rebounded once shielded from the 100. Monsters now fled at the sight of humans, a development she called astonishing. Mars asked where the monster army was, and Keely pointed it out. When he approached, he was stunned. The creatures were massive. He counted and questioned whether there were really 10. Keely explained their growth, fed with monster meat. Prey already preyed upon prey, but rare high-grade meals and the leftover beasts from the stampede, along with her custom potions, had accelerated their development and boosted their stats immensely. Mars noted the numbers. 100 core units felt small for the scale of war coming. Keely reassured him. The core was just that, trained veterans. The rest roamed freely in the demon beast forest. Alphas expanded territory daily. War wolf packs bred naturally, and in her words, were surprisingly kind and even cute. Still, the alpha answered directly only to King Zeros. Mars froze, incredulous that a war wolf could obey him. Keely reminded him of the one he had brought back a year prior, trembling and scarred. She asked whether he had beaten it half to death. Silence answered her, and she continued. The wolf now recognized him as the apex predator. She demonstrated the obedience, noting that a single command invoking Zeros' name was enough to bring immediate compliance. Mars found it unervingly efficient. Domestication, she said, had proceeded shockingly smoothly. The alpha he had brought back was high tier. Combined with the rest, there were now 1,300 monsters under control. The army was fully prepared. Mars studied the assembly, quiet unease in his mind. Something still felt off, yet they were ready. Falloon would face Dorson's forces, and this would be the first full-scale war under King Mars's leadership. After the preparations for war, both sides finally met on the Brics plains in northern Cadia. The invading army of Dorson stood opposite the united forces of Falloon and Cadia. The engagement that would later be called the Battle of Brics opened with the mages of Dorson unleashing their spells into the sky, where they collided with Falloon's magic. A mage informed General Kinbury that Falloon's spell output was stronger than expected and questioned whether they should retaliate. Kinbury decided there was no need. Falloon fielded perhaps 2,000 soldiers, while Dorson brought 10,000, 5 times their strength. His men were trained for engagements, fought with overwhelming numbers, and they stood ready. Even so, one factor refused to leave his mind. Falloon's current queen, Frau, the Thunder Empress, a prodigy since her youth, possessed the ability to overturn a battlefield with a single strike. Even acknowledging the might of Frau herself, Dorson still held the advantage in numbers. There was no need to spend additional power countering the enemy's spells. Dorson's mage corps would maintain their barriers without pause, forcing the Falloon casters to exhaust their mana. Once their magic faded, superior numbers would decide the rest. Yet an even greater concern remained. King Zeros of Falloon. He had taken the throne by force. In Falloon's arena, he stood unmatched, and after the Cadia stampede, his reputation continued to spread. The blood of the ancient hero was said to run strong within him. A figure blessed by the gods wielding strength beyond normal limits was not difficult to imagine. Still, Dorson possessed hidden trump cards of its own. A report arrived. Falloon's magic barrage had ceased. It was time to deploy the knights. Dorson's cavalry surged ahead and collided head-on with Falloon's advancing order. General Kinbury watched the field and noted the enemy's resilience. Even after committing many soldiers, Falloon's line had not collapsed. It was within expectation. 2,000 facing half of Dorson's blades would be ground down eventually. That would still leave 8,000 fresh troops against barely 1,000 remaining defenders. Individual strength would not close that distance. In war, numbers decided the outcome, and he considered the victory his. From his position, King Zeros observed the Dorson formation. Their troops moved with discipline, repeatedly forcing 2-on-1 and 3-on-1 engagements wherever they pressed. Adma reached him with an update. The lower ranks were nearing their limit. Zeros accepted the report with appreciation. Even those outside the top 10 were receiving their first experience of real combat. If the strongest fighters unleashed everything from the start, the rest would never see the battlefield. Battles against monsters differed from clashes between people, just as arena matches differed from war. No one knew when the next conflict would come. It was better for them to grow accustomed to coordinated fighting now. He had already asked Red Knight Commander Warren, Black Knight Commander Chrome, and even Frau to restrain their power. The second unit was enduring hard fights, but the hope was simple: exhaust Dorson and force a retreat. Excessive damage would only leave bitterness behind. Abma asked whether it was time to release the upper ranks. Zeros approved and ordered a gradual rotation. Believing the momentum belonged to them, the Dorson Knights pushed forward. Then a massive figure closed in from behind. A single swing tore into their formation, sending armored bodies scattering across the plain. Once a lumberjack known for raw physical strength, he lived by a simple rule: do not try to stop it, avoid it. Ranked 30th among Falloon's 100, he stood as a frontline powerhouse. In his hands rested the blood rod, a gift from King Mars, carved from the trunk of a giant subspecies that had fallen as one. Too hard to refine, too heavy for ordinary warriors. Wanfu carried it without hesitation. A Dorson knight laid eyes on Wanfu and understood at once that the figure before them was closer to a monster than a man. Inside the command tent, a report reached General Kinbury. The front lines were beginning to fall back. With a fivefold advantage, he found it impossible to accept. A shift in the battle should not have come so easily. The possibility arose that King Zeros himself had entered the field. Further clarification followed. Several enemy elites had joined the fight, but Zeros was not among them. Even so, Falloon's forces were overwhelming entire squads. The three-man tactics that had worked moments earlier were failing, and units were being crushed. If Zeros was absent, then the attackers had to be high-ranking members of the 100. The option of retreat surfaced. Kinbury weighed the situation. Falloon's surge carried real force. A withdrawal under pressure might shatter the army outright. Holding position risked the same outcome. The decision hung in the balance. A request came forward, asking permission to engage. Kinbury looked to the two men before him, Dorson's aces, preserved for the moment they would face Zeros himself. The Knights of the Five Thrones, Mateus and Dante. Mateus, having waited long enough, pressed to enter the battle. Kinbury granted it. Their task was simple: buy time for main force to disengage. On the field, Wanfu measured the chaos around him. In Falloon's arena, victory had always escaped him. Here, on open ground, he intended to demonstrate his power. Before the true upper ranks arrived, he would break the enemy in front of him. Nearby, Mateus took note of the giant size. Wanfu swung the blood rod. Mateus avoided it with ease. An emotion left Wanfu staring in disbelief. Wanfu demanded the man's identity. Mateus gave his name and revealed his standing as one of the Five Thrones, the highest rank within Dorson's order, and checked whether the title was familiar. Wanfu knew it well. The name belonged to the 5 strongest warriors Dorson possessed, and the encounter caught his interest. He gave his own name in return, a member of Falloon's 100, and made his intention to crush the opponent clear. In the next instant, blood burst from Wanfu's head, and the giant collapsed. Mateus judged that he could end the fight immediately, but his assignment was only to secure time. He signaled the surrounding knights. Their role was finished. By General Kinbury's command, they were to withdraw. With that, Mateus directed his attention toward King Zeros and regarded the exchange as even. Agma saw the movement across the field as Dorson's army began pulling away. He looked to Zeros for the order to chase. Zeros refused. The wounded would be treated first. He evaluated the result calmly. Dorson's strength had been reduced, though not shattered. More importantly, Falloon soldiers had gained true battlefield experience. That alone was sufficient. If matters continued this way, the war could end without leaving hatred behind. Night settled over the encampment. Agma admitted he had already reached his limit. Chrome answered that the fighting had not truly begun. The remark set Agma off. He had not even been allowed to engage, left behind to issue commands, something that did not suit him at all. He turned on Chrome, pointing out that Chrome had at least swung his blade. The tension in Chrome's expression was obvious, intense enough that the entire squad moved carefully around him. Warren stepped in and set the expectation for the next day. They would fight at full strength, without restraint. Chrome accepted that the plan of giving the lower ranks experience had applied only to the first day. Agma declared that he would be the first to enter the battle when morning came. Elsewhere, Frau admitted that her patience had nearly run out. When the sun rose again, she intended to release her full magic, and she was ready for it. In Dorson's encampment, General Kinbury considered their position. The 100 had never been an enemy that could be removed with a single decisive action. He had prepared for multiple outcomes and avoided overconfidence. Yet the main force had still taken heavy damage. The scale of Falloon's strength no longer felt clear. A report arrived. The supply unit on its way to them had been ambushed and destroyed. Kinbury struggled to accept it. The route passed through territory controlled by Cadian nobles aligned with Dorson. Suspicion turned toward betrayal, but the accompanying knight denied it and relayed another explanation. Witnesses were claiming that a massive horde of monsters had carried out the attack. The possibility left him unsettled. Such a concentration might be imaginable in the south, but northern Cadia should not have housed anything of that size. His thoughts shifted to Mars of Falloon. The scene of the ambush unfolded. As the unit advanced, Killy directed the monsters to hold their positions, waiting for the right distance. When the target entered range, she released them. The horde surged forward. The knights froze at the sight, then were swallowed by it. The monsters ripped through their formation and left nothing behind. From a nearby vantage point, Keely watched the carnage. More than 500 answered her control, moving in seamless coordination. She regarded them like pets and allowed them to devour everything, leaving the area picked clean. Back at Dorson's encampment, an official rejected the report outright, commanding that many monsters should have been beyond any human. Kinbury answered by choosing caution. Between the earlier stampede and this attack, the creatures kept moving in ways that served Falloon's needs. If Dorson's supply lines were gone, their campaign from this point forward would collapse. He reached a decision. They would withdraw while they still had the strength to manage it. The retreat would begin at dawn. Morning broke over Dorson's encampment. An urgent call reached General Kinbury with news that Falloon's forces were on the move. The report rattled him. Even with the supply lines severed, Dorson still held a significant numerical advantage. And at the head of the advance rode King Mars. Mars had not expected events to turn in this direction. The night before, word had spread through the ranks that Dorson's army was preparing to flee. Agma urged that fear be carved into the enemy so deeply they would never seek another fight, pressing that this was the moment for Mars to step onto the battlefield. Mars waited in silence. They had come close to ending the war without creating deeper resentment. That hope had guided the decision to let Keely strike the supply unit, and at least her involvement had gone unnoticed. Problems should be resolved without force when possible. More fighting was something he wanted to avoid. He made it clear he did not intend to lead the charge. Warren accepted the words in his own way. To him, Mars had restrained himself the day before so the lower ranks could gain experience. There was no longer any need for that restraint. Mars understood that Warren had missed the point. Chrome spoke next, praising a king who stood at the front rather than hiding behind others, setting Mars apart from rulers who remained in comfort far from danger. Again, Mars found himself questioning when placing a king on the front line had ever been sound strategy. Around them, the 100 roared his name, voices rising again and again. Now, in the present, those same warriors advanced with Mars at their center, cutting through Dorson's army. From within the collapsing formation, Kinbury could not hide his fear. This should not have been the moment for Falloon to sortie. Even without supplies, Dorson's numbers should have secured the advantage. An official called out to him, panic breaking through discipline, pointing toward the sky. The Thunder Empress had arrived. Frau began invoking her spell, calling upon the force that tore through the heavens and summoned the endless hound of thunder. Those who heard the incantation immediately understood what was coming, and the realization spread through the Dorson mages. They raised their barriers and braced themselves, lowering their bodies behind layers of protection. Her chant continued, voice carrying across the battlefield as she called for countless bolts to gather, to become a divine prayer and drown the world in terminal light without end. This was the strike that had earned her name, the Thunder Empress. The judgment fell. A pillar of lightning crashed into Dorson's army, and an explosion rolled outward in its wake. Within the chaos, one of Dorson's officials grasped the difference from the previous day. Frau had not displayed anything of this magnitude before. She had conserved her strength. Their barriers had endured at the time, but sustaining them for so long had drained the mage core. Now, exhausted, their wards could no longer withstand such power. General Kinbury saw the shape of it. Mars had waited for this moment, holding his elites back until the opening appeared, and then committing them all at once. Kinbury immediately dispatched Matthias and Dante with his personal knights, ordering them to intercept Falloon's spearhead and bring down Mars. The two soon reached him amid the fighting, identifying themselves as they faced the king. Matthias moved first. He burst forward with startling speed, unleashing a flurry of strikes. Mars noted that the number of swings exceeded his initial read. He answered with a heavy kick that drove Matthias away, recognizing a swordsman built entirely around quickness. At the same time, Dante came in from behind. Mars turned and caught the blow, assessing the man as the opposite type, built on raw power and remarkable for possessing such strength without relying on monster meat. Mars raised an unseen barrier. Its presence felt even if its form could not be read. Then he removed the gravity armlet. He asked whether the two before him would yield. They rejected the idea. Even if one attack had been turned aside, the fight remained 2 against 1. Mars answered by deciding he would no longer restrain himself and accepted that they would fall here. With Frau's armlet gone, the weight that had pressed on him vanished. Without the 5-fold gravity, his body responded with far greater ease. Matthias pushed forward again, anger tightening his movements. He rushed in, committed to fighting to the end. Mars met him once. A single strike landed cleanly. Blood burst from Matthias's body, and he dropped. Dante moved to follow, but before his blow could complete, Mars cut through him. The man fell split in 2. Behind their king, the 100 raised their voices. Across the field, Dorson's knights watched the fall of the 5 thrones and struggled to process it. In another sector, Warren and Chrome continued tearing through the army. Seeing the collapse, General Kinbury ordered his men to flee, to scatter, to survive. Preserving as many lives as possible became the only objective left. Ogma closed the distance before that retreat could take shape. A strike came fast and ended it. When the battle was over, news reached the king of Dorson. The report named it a crushing defeat. 70% of their forces were gone, and continuing the war was no longer possible. The king resolved to seek peace. Before that decision could settle, a young woman stepped forward and declared there was no need for negotiations, because she would kill King Mars herself. Power rolled from her in waves, vast and difficult to measure. Carmela prepared for their approach to Falloon. Rumors had reached her that the people there consumed monster meat, and she sought confirmation from the man accompanying her. He affirmed what she had heard, adding that it was said to grant demonic power. Carmela regarded the idea as absurd. To her, true strength could only be obtained through proper discipline. She resolved to confront them herself and demonstrate what she believed to be noble power. Far away, in the royal castle's training yard, Yamato sparred with King Mars. Yamato moved first and unleashed the Mirage Sword. The attack was fast. Even so, Mars judged that defense required movements even smaller and more precise than offense. Any opening, no matter how slight, could be seized. Yamato watched as every strike was stopped. He had anticipated as much. Mars let out a weary smile. Yamato had indeed reproduced the Mirage Sword, the same technique once used by Matthias of Dorson's 5 thrones during the recent battle. After Mars defeated 2 of those figures, the very symbols of Dorson's martial supremacy, their side had lost the will to continue. The interception unit collapsed. As a retreat began, Hunter pursued, and most of the remaining troops were destroyed. At that time, on the battlefield, Mars had ordered Ogma to stop. If the advance continued, Dorson's army would be annihilated. Ogma acknowledged the reasoning. Ogma then suggested allowing a handful to escape so someone would remain to carry word of King Zero's terror. Mars failed to see the relevance. He gave the command to end the pursuit. They had struck harder than expected, but Dorson would think twice before provoking Falloon again. Back in the present, Mars turned his attention to Yamato. The boy had not only copied Matthias' swordsmanship, he had also taken in Dante's Earthbreak, and Yamato confirmed that was true. Yamato held the position of 4th rank within the 100. Once he grasped the underlying principle of a technique, he could reproduce it. Mars acknowledged the feat to learn something from single look could only be described one way. Yamato dismissed the praise. He lowered himself in respect and credited the power granted to him by Mars. believing he would never have reached such heights within his lifetime without it. Physically, he had not been especially gifted at the start. He had consumed vast quantities of monster meat, forcing growth, breaking his body again and again until he became capable of handling high-difficulty sword arts. His fixation on the blade was undeniable. He had even recreated the sonic blade, a technique usually reserved for the elites of the 100. Because of that talent, Mars had assigned him, during the war, to observe the battles of the 5 thrones. Yet, in the end, the conflict had settled. Now the land was quiet, and Mars hoped those calm days would continue. At the castle gate, a woman approached. The guard stopped her and demanded her identity and her reason for coming. She responded as though her name alone should have been sufficient, questioning whether they truly failed to recognize her. The guards asked who she had arranged to meet. Without confirmation, they could not allow entry. She admitted she had no appointment and had simply decided to visit King Zeros. Then she gave her name and her origin. She was Carmela of the Dorson kingdom, one of the 5 thrones. One guard mocked her clothing, while the other told her to turn back. Carmela judged the response at the gate to be rigid. With a simple motion, she released a wind spell. The force hurled the guards aside and blew the gate open. More soldiers rushed in at once, surrounding her and demanding her identity while blocking any path forward. Carmela answered with a single gesture. A blade of force cut one of them down. The others reacted in shock, recognizing the technique as the sonic blade. She had not drawn a weapon. The attack had been fired with nothing more than a flick of her fingers. The noise irritated her. She silenced the next man just as easily. Within moments, the reinforcements fell as well. To her, they had been as fragile as paper. The Knights of Falloon failed to impress. Then a voice ordered her to stop. The man who stepped forward was Bled, captain of the Blue Knight Corps. He demanded her name. Carmela regarded the interruption as yet another nuisance. She introduced herself and declared her position as the 3rd of Dorson's 5 thrones. She instructed him to end the feudal resistance and clear the path. Her business was with King Zeros. Bled understood at once that she stood among the highest class of fighters. He carried the rank of 10th within the 100 and made it clear he would not fall easily. Carmela mocked the way he carried himself. She raised her hand and released another sonic blade. Bled reacted in time, bringing up his shield to intercept it. The defense caught her attention. She questioned whether it was mithril. Bled had already recognized her technique, and a minimal motion required to fire it. He revealed that the shield had been given to him by King Mars, discovered in the demon beast forest and entrusted to him as a symbol of pride. The shield frustrated her. She launched another sonic blade, and once again Bled blocked it. She grew tired of the exchange, pointing out that hiding behind defense alone would never decide a battle. Bled answered with action. He surged forward and drove into her with a shield bash. Carmela slipped aside in time, yet even the pressure of the passing strike brushed her skin like a blade. He drove forward again, charging straight at Carmela with crushing force. Carmela sprang to the wall and kicked off it, slipping past his path. The impact he carried failed to leave a mark on the stone, and she recognized that he was breaking with mana. It was a style built on weight and speed. A direct hit would have crushed her, yet an attack that failed to land meant nothing. Bled pressed on, unable to make contact. Carmela taunted him, her tone edged with mockery. She remarked on his restraint and ridiculed the lack in his approach. The exchange no longer entertained her. Directness was acceptable, but his attacks remained insufficient. She stepped in close, bringing herself face to face with him. She acknowledged his sincerity and decency, then dismissed him as tedious, wondering if others had told him the same. Bled faltered for a moment. In that instant, Carmela shifted behind him. She noted his inexperience as she struck. The blade pierced his back. Bled staggered forward from the force, wounded, yet still moving. The sight caused her to pause. The spine should have been severed. She commented on his stubbornness, surprised that he remained alive after the blow. Bled answered that a member of the 100 would not fall to something like that. Carmela reminded him of the men she had cut down on her way to the castle. Bled maintained that they were not dead. They were not trained so lightly. If injuries of that level had been fatal, the 100 would have been wiped out long ago. Carmela's expression tightened. By her measure, Bled should have died. A unit that could survive poisoned meat and continue fighting fit the image of savages well enough. If he failed to fall when expected, the situation would grow troublesome. Bled answered that bluster was all she possessed. He believed he understood her. Carmela responded that he and his men had thrown their lives away for nothing. Another voice cut in, rejecting that claim. An unseen strike tore toward her. Carmela twisted aside, just in time. The force passed through the space where she had stood, enough to leave nothing behind had it connected. A new figure entered the field. Yamato had arrived. He gave credit to the Blue Knight Corps for buying the time needed for him to reach the scene. Carmela assessed his presence. She admitted that a direct hit would have reduced her body to pieces. She demanded to know who stood before her. Yamato introduced himself and stated his rank as 4th within 100. He also served Falloon as a swordsmanship instructor. He awaited the fight ahead. The clash was set. This battle is about to begin. What do you think will come out on top? Share your thoughts in the comments.